This is an SOS distress call from the mining ship Red Dwarf. The crew are dead, killed by a radiation leak. The only survivors were Dave Lister, who was in suspended animation during the disaster, and his pregnant cat, who was safely sealed in the hold. Revived 3 million years later, Lister's only companions are a life form who evolved from the cat, and Arnold Rimmer, a hologram simulation of one of the dead crew. In the 3 million years we've been away, it is my fond hope that mankind has abolished war, cured all disease, and gotten rid of those little Western saloon doors you get in trendy clothes shops. What's up, Smegheads, and welcome to episode 3 of Thanks for the Memory, our Red Dwarf podcast, where we rewatch every episode of the BBC comedy show Red Dwarf and discuss them. By the way, who the heck am I? My name is Blake, all the way over here across the pond in the good old USOA, and I'm here with...
Lee! Hey, Blake!
Hello, Lee. It's good to see you.
It is good to see you too. I am excited to talk. It feels like such a long time ago since we recorded the first 2 episodes. And it was like I was so desperate after talking about them too. I just wanted to get on and rewatch the next ones. So I've been pestering you for the last couple of weeks. I'm like, can we record soon, please? Because I need to watch them.
Well, and I jumped on watching them pretty quick, and then took a break. I mean, I think I watched them like immediately after we recorded the prior 2 episodes, and then I've just recently watched them maybe for the 3rd time and really took notes. And my brain's already like, why? We already went weird places that I wouldn't have thought we would go in a Red Dwarf podcast. And I already see that's going to happen this go-round too, as like with the notes and stuff I'm taking.
I think because of the conversations that we had on the last 2 episodes, I've watched these 2 with a very different eye.
Yes. Our conversations definitely colored my rewatch this go-round.
Which is good.
Oh, I think it's good.
Yeah.
It's also tough because we had set out these questions that we would try to answer each pod, and what I'm discovering is like I have several. like if I have an answer of like, oh, who's the standout character, I'll start to write one down, and then the episode keeps going. I'm like, well, actually, and like and then I find myself just writing notes about the individual characters because I think we're still in. Well, what are we in right now? We're at episode 3, right?
Yeah,
and it's still kind of building to what it's gonna be,
without a doubt.
Yeah.
And so speaking of which, we are going to be discussing episode 3, which is Balance of Power, which originally aired in the UK on February 29th, 1988. And the synopsis for this episode was Lister wants to go on a date with the hologram of Navigation Officer Christine Kachansky. Much to Rimmer's disapproval, Lister decides to do a cooking exam so he can outrank Rimmer, but Rimmer has a cunning plan.
Nice Blackadder reference there. I like that. We do Blackadder when this is done?
I mean, we could do. I think Tracy might be one to be on that one as well.
That would be fantastic.
It would be cool. So
this one is, and we were just before the pod, I was mentioning, I'm trying to remember as I'm rewatching this, when I actually saw them air. Now, it turns out, we figured out that in the States, these did air like a couple of months later. It wasn't that far off from their original airing. I think I might have caught on somewhere around season 2, actually. So which, I watched, and then as they did the replays of these, because Kachansky, and the reason I bring that up is she is such a cornerstone of the lore of the show, who is never in the show. I mean, except for 2 episodes. Later, she will show up more concretely, but especially like with this actress, right? Like it's only... Does she even have another appearance? I can't remember.
I don't think so. Do you know who she is then, Blake? Because she's kind of famous for more than Red Dwarf over here.
Oh, I don't know that, no.
She is a singer.
Oh, that's awesome.
So in the 80s, I think she only had one. The band was called Altered Images.
I love this because it didn't pop up on anything I saw prior.
Claire Grogan. So she was a part of Altered Images in the 1980s, typical 1980s sort of pop band. They did a song called Happy Birthday, which was probably one of the most famous ones. I will ask you to go and look them up.
Heck yeah.
But other than that, I don't know. Because even when we're getting way ahead of ourselves at this point, even when Kachansky comes back, it's not Claire Grogan.
No, though I do think there is some video message he gets from Claire Grogan, at one point in a later episode before the recast Kachansky shows up.
I'm trying to remember. I can't even remember how she comes back in. Anyway, we're a long way away from that.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's what's been exciting is all of this has been long enough that it's still it's like a rediscovery for me.
Oh yeah, without a doubt.
Going through these pieces. And of course, sometimes you try to remember, like, how do they bring this person back and do that? And then you forget, oh yeah, like in the most BS way. That's why you don't remember it. It's just kind of hand waved and they're there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember how she comes back into it. Anyway, but we're about 5 seasons away from that at this point.
But she's like, I mean, obviously she's in the first episode, but this starts to really solidify her as part of Lister's core canon. Yes. And I think previous episode we talked about Rimmer's core canon of his family, his upbringing, which comes up again, but they solidify that his family sucked, and that like that's why he is how he is. And this Kachansky thing of this lady that he's barely spoken to becomes such a fixture in his mind and is such a core thing that even if, like me, you saw it out of order a little bit in the beginning, you totally understand who that is.
Yes.
So when I got to see the first episodes on rerun, I'm like, oh, that's who he's talking about. I just thought it was a reference to someone, you hadn't seen or whatever, was off camera or whatever.
But not that she is a huge part of it, but not physically a huge part of it.
Exactly.
Although when she comes into this episode, so good.
Oh, it's flipping brilliant. So let's see. Kind of, I wrote a bunch of stuff down as I went, and I kind of want to. To me, some of this what we're talking about kind of plays out of the questions that you had originally sent out, which was a character was a standout, and then what I found myself doing was I wrote about 2 people really.
Okay,
but I'm curious. Did you have somebody that stood out to you?
Not really in this one.
So it's funny you say that because I originally wrote Rimmer and my notes were, this establishes the extreme prat that Rimmer is.
Yes.
He's not just, it's not that he's just overzealous about wanting to be important. He wants to do it in a way that only he can do it by trying to squish everyone around him.
Yes.
It's like that whole opposite of like true strength. And it's why I think we like to see him fail. Like in the previous episode, I was like, man, I forget how sad Rimmer's story is. And I almost kind of feel a little sorry for him. And then you watch this, you're like, oh, right. This is why we don't care and we can laugh at him failing on his face constantly. Because even though it might be a dark and bad backstory, the way he chooses to overcome it is literally by trying to just smush anybody around him. So, you can't feel sorry for him because he would smush you in a heartbeat, kind of a thing.
It's like when he gives Lister the cigarette and he makes sure that he gets exactly half of it. Yeah. Come on, take off the scraggy bits. Yeah. And speaking of, how we talked about this, the previous episode was intended to be like the 4th episode? Yes.
And and we weren't sure about whether they actually filmed them that way or, or if they made that decision prior to filming that they reordered it. But this kind of does feel like it could have been the 2nd episode in aspects. Like, I'm glad it isn't. I think they were smart to do the 2nd episode and show the weird sci-fi.
Yes.
Because this episode is much more a smaller sitcom based off the things you already know, which are these 2 people stuck together, the eccentric computer, our cat, and then the whole thing about how holograms work. Right? And so it feels like, in a way, that information does feel like a 2nd episode.
Yeah, because it feels like exactly what we talked about for the first 2, that it could have been quite easy for this series to have just been a bog standard sitcom on a spaceship. But by putting that Future Echoes episode in at number 2 establishes that it is going to be more than that.
Right, and I would say that these next couple of episodes are more a standard sitcom-y, still in space. And then as I think we get to the final couple episodes of the season, we get the weird sci-fi back in. So I get why they did that. That was a smart rearrange.
I agree with you. Yeah, I've watching these 2 episodes. I didn't see that. I was going off that conversation of trying to look at it like, can I tell that this was meant to be episode 2? And I couldn't. But then you saying that perfectly makes sense. That they wanted to ease you in to get to know the characters before they slap the sci-fi stuff on you. But then go, hang on, it might come as a bit of a slap in the face when we suddenly introduce this. Let's do it early. And it makes perfect sense.
It does, and it also is like watching as an audience. They do that thing you want to do with a show, which is like, I'm going to tune in because I don't know what's going to happen. Like I don't have a guess of what'll happen. So like that leads into. So I was convinced like, oh, Rimmer. And as I kept watching far as which character stood out, well, then I said, I know maybe it's Lister. And I wrote down Lister. And the reason I did was like we did for Rimmer in the previous episode, in this episode, we get the sadness at the core of Lister's story.
Yes.
Like that whole flashback as, the show opens with, Lister just being hammered by Rimmer, who's doing inventory, which would be smart to do to keep the one human alive and the cat. But like, doesn't need to be done in that super corporate military like effective way.
No.
But there he is doing it, and Lister's just like, it's Saturday night. I want to get out and boogie. Is that what he says?
Yeah.
I want to go have some fun.
I want to go and have a drink.
Yeah. But yet he has no one to do that with. And he can literally, in fact, I'm almost confident he is having a beer while he's doing the checklist. Yeah. Which, by the way, I love those like gray painted beer cans that have like a generic label that just says beer, however many ounces or milliliters are in there, which would be like, that's what would probably happen on a big giant spaceship like that, which is like these like big things that would just go in. But his sad, because like we then go to him going to the I don't know. It's a place that doesn't show up again much after the second season, but that sort of mess hall.
It's like so if you've obviously you haven't, Blake, but if you'd ever been to the UK in the late 80s, early 90s and been to a nightclub, that's what they looked like.
Yeah. I have seen music videos, so I'm aware in that respect.
That's what they looked like. So yes, I think that's what it was meant to be.
I did go to a nightclub in Galway, Ireland.
Okay.
In the early 2000s. That now that you say that, I'm like, you know what? That looks about right. Because it's like it's in the area where they did in the opening episode. They have like the funeral, and it kind of looks like it's someplace where everybody, in a sense, it is truly the public house, almost, right?
Yeah.
And he's there having a pint by himself, and starts to reminisce, and you see all the crew, including Mr. Weasley, and everybody dancing. And it's funny because it's so different looking. Like, yes, it's not just that there's a dance party, but from a technical standpoint, when Rimmer's trying to make his way through the party, the camera switches to handheld, which doesn't happen very often in the show.
Okay, I never noticed that at all.
No, and it's like tracking him through and everything. And, then you get the final shot of that where Rimmer says, "I'm alone," after everybody fades away and all the memories fade away.
It's so sad that as well. Like it's not even played out for laughs. It's played out with the sad music and him sat there on his own. Like it's really meant to tug at your heartstrings.
And to me, again, is why it almost feels like, this could have been the second episode to address. I mean, I could see how that could be following the previous one. But again, I do think in hindsight, it was smarter to break it up,
Yeah.
But the other piece of lore that we get that we now implicitly understand, and I forgot it was in this episode, again, why it kind of almost feels like it's the second episode, it's explicitly stated why Rimmer was
chosen to be the hologram. Yeah.
Right. To come back as a hologram by Holly, and that he was statistically the most likely person to keep Lister sane. And he never really says it yet. It might be in one of the following episodes, but I know at some point, it's much more clear that Holly's like, my job is to keep you alive because you're like the last human that I have in here. But he doesn't really say it in that way here. He's just like, maybe it's better to have you be sane than not. I don't know. Like Holly, we haven't gotten Holly caring about things quite yet.
No, he's still very computer. Everything's deadpan, which I love, to be fair. But it's all deadpan.
And it's true. When he does start to care, it's not that that dial doesn't go to like 11.
No.
It's just a little bit more. But it's also cached under the idea that he's starting to get a little more loopy as time goes on too. Because while Rimmer might have been the best person to keep Lister sane, there is no best person to keep Holly sane. You know, as it goes.
No, not at all.
But that's like a core piece of the lore too, and understanding why. So this is why this guy, is here. So I was kind of split down the middle with as far as if there was a standout, they kind of share it to me in this episode.
They do, but I would I would even go so far as to say that Claire Grogan, for the brief moment she is in it, she kills it. Like, just brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, the conceit that Lister wants a date with Kochanski, so he's going to bring her, shut down Rimmer, because there can only be one hologram, and use the light bee, which I don't even know if they use that term yet, but to let this ship bring her back as a hologram for a date, which is... It's one of those things as a kid, I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's the plot. But now I'm like, this is like cosmic level horror. Hey, dude, I'm going to kill you for just 4 hours. I promise. You'll disappear into who knows what. And I'm going to go on a date. And then I'll bring you back, man. I promise. It's such a wild concept that would be its own like Isaac Asimov short story, you know, for like a sci-fi theme. It's super horrific.
Yeah. That's why Rimmer wanted leaving on when Lister was going to go into stasis for the last time, I guess. Similar thing.
Right. Yeah, because he was like, when we get to Earth, you won't cut me back on.
Yeah.
You'll just leave me off. And there is something that you know, I thought about watching this episode, and I don't know if you have an answer to this. So quick, especially the beginning of this episode where he's like being like, you know, count the chickens and the reconstituted chickens and all this. And he's being really mean to Lister, but making him do work.
Yeah.
Which happens less and less as the show goes on. And Lister only does the work he has to do to absolutely survive. But if Rimmer can't touch anything and he's just a hologram, and technically he outranks Dave, so I don't think Dave can tell Holly to cut Rimmer off without his permission. But why is he listening to Rimmer? Why is he? Yeah. And even though Rimmer says you're not really following the chain of command, but he kind of does.
And he doesn't have to. But
no.
that plays into this whole episode, really, of why he ends up doing what he's doing, because he's still, for all he doesn't play by the rules, he really does still play by the rules entirely for this episode.
And it might just not be explained super, or it might just not be laid out very well. I think the idea is because even though Rimmer is the next to last rank on the ship, Lister's just below him, he cannot make Holly stop with Rimmer. And I think that's the thing. And I know that is kind of in there, and that's why Lister then says, well, I'll go take an exam to try to be, I don't even know if an officer, but something that would outrank Lister, and in this case being the chef, or sorry, outrank Rimmer. It's not laid out, right? Like you're kind of piece that together.
Yeah.
That's the reason why.
And how is that so Lister, by the way, that he would go the path of least resistance. So rather than go, I'm going to do something that puts me way high rank above Rimmer, I'm literally going to do the least amount of work I can to be able to outrank him.
Yeah, because he hates, and that is a thing for his character throughout this whole series, is like the idea of like chain of command and rules and yada yada. I mean, he's like total anarchist, right?
Yeah.
He doesn't like any of that stuff. So yeah, to be like, no, I'm going to be the chef. That's Mr. Was it Mr. Lister, chef, sir? Get used to it.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Like stupid. I mean, talk about the flashback scene. There's a bit of trivia there, Blake.
The flashback scene was intended to be a recurring theme throughout the series, showing Lister's secret feelings of intense loneliness and his contrasting past and present lives, but the idea was scrapped. And it's because if you look at who was cast, and granted, some of the people are bigger deals, maybe later than they were at the time, but that seems like it could have been a reality to keep people around. But for how real Lister's sadness was, and I feel like, I think it becomes a very different show.
Yes.
If you live in that.
Yes. And that's probably why they cut exactly what we've talked about this episode and the last two. If you root the series entirely, not entirely, but if you keep that sort of dark undertone there all the way through, it could drag it down. It could have ended up not being as good as it was. Yeah, instead of just being just under the surface. Because we talked about everybody that you meet has a tragic, horrible backstory for like they're like, and so it is like under the surface. But I think it's what gives them the like, I don't care. I'll say whatever I want.
and so you almost believe these overwrought lines that I'm like, well, no one would say that, but you've written this to be funny, but I believe it because these people are in such a wild state that it actually feels believable that, I don't know, that's the kind of stuff you do. Rimmer's not good at anything, but he'll work on his insults,
Yes.
There's
so many good ones. I can't think of any that specifically, but oh my God.
Does your favorite Goit show back up in this one? I feel like it does.
I think it does, yes. I love that. I don't know why. It just makes me laugh.
Yeah, the following episode has some good ones too that make me very happy.
So I'm going to jump in just briefly. So this was kind of in my mind in the first 2 episodes. And then when I watched the third one, I was like, okay. And then the fourth one definitely cements it. So Cat.
Yes.
Danny John Jules, without a doubt, bases his character of the cat, at least at this point, on James Brown, 100%.
Oh yes, it's 100%. James Brown. Yeah, James Brown in cat form. Doesn't even say like, get back. He says something that's...
Get back, jump back, get back. Yeah, and you're like, all right, yeah. I wonder why that choice was there.
Well, I mean, to be fair, and I think he's kind of said this in interviews too and stuff, that's... Like, there is nothing there. Like, in the script, there's really nothing there. I'm glad they cast who they did.
Okay.
Because it's not, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, look, you would want the people who are Lister and Rimmer to be Lister and Rimmer. But you could see how people could read the script and go, oh, I got an idea how to play Rimmer. Yeah. I got to play Lister. The cat, I mean, it doesn't really, but he leans into, like, being this live... cat. Am I mixing my episodes up? Is this the fish episode?
No, I think that's the next one.
That's the next one.
Yeah, I think that's the next one.
Which is kind of a problem because right now the cat's bits are interchangeable. He is still not part of this cast, I feel like.
Yeah, definitely.
Or part of the crew.
Yeah, talk about this one and the next one is still very... the next one, not so much because he is a core to that entire story.
Yes.
But even a lot of the bits do you know what? We're going to do that in the next episode. Let's just leave that there.
We'll put a pin on it because the cat starts to become more of the cat in the next episode.
Whereas this one, his scenes in it are still very much joke punchline. Yes.
Yeah. He's just comic relief. Yeah. We don't really, because even though he technically has a sad backstory, he doesn't seem to care, which is very cat-like. So, I mean, it's not like that's incorrect, but yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, it's brilliant he came up with what he came up with, because I just don't think there's a lot there, And can you imagine, too, like, what? All right, I'm going to be a cat, and then, like, I dress up really well. I'll do James Brown, and, like, this show will last, like, 2 seasons.
So here's a question, then, Blake. You've watched the American pilot.
Yes.
What was the cat like in that?
So in the first one, it's male. He's more reserved. It's not bad. Then there's like that one, the almost second pilot that was done, and it's a female. That's actually better, to be honest. There's like more energy there by the performer, but it's fine. It's okay. They kind of went with another song and dance man, but you can almost, and I could be wrong about this, but you almost feel like either he refused to look at the episodes because he didn't want to be like, I don't want to just imitate the guy, which is, I get it. Or he actively was like, I'm not going to do anything like that.
Yeah, so he watched it and then actively went, I want to go as far away as possible from that.
If you were going to do the American version and decided you had to have an American Lister, which there is something to be said for the slobbiest guy, and I would not, if you were going to keep Crichton, I would have kept the cat too.
Yeah.
Like, so it's weird. They try to make him more of a character, like, than the cat was in those first episodes.
Okay.
And mind you, they make this after, Red Dwarf's been running for at least 3 seasons of that, 4 seasons at that point. So, it just doesn't work. This just gets it. He's got that cat vibe down.
Oh, he's brilliant.
So well. But you are right. When we get to the next episode, it was like, this is nice. I get to see him be like part of the show instead of just a...
Because in that, we'll talk about on the next episode. Let's just leave a cliffhanger there, because I did a little bit of that joke punchline, and then hang on, yeah,
I know it's almost hard not to do. It's not to do multiple of these at once.
Yeah. I have to ask, why does a hologram need to take a shower?
Oh yeah, that bit.
Like, why?
So it's funny. Just as I said, we're getting core lore anchor points like the Kachansky deal and stuff, and how important that is to Lister and his loneliness and yada yada. And we'll get some, but it's like they also were trying to create some heavy lore things that never come back up again. Like, I get the idea of, they just, and this is a good thing, because I think sometimes sci-fi screws up when they try to explain too much, because then you start picking at it and going, well, if it's like that, then why not this, right? They also don't explain why he can't touch anything, but he can lay down in the bunk. Like,
I noticed that.
And he does that frequently. Yep. And they're very much cake and eat it too situation with him, which obviously at some point they decide to go, screw it. We're just going to address this right now.
Yeah.
Because writing around this concept has been a pain in the butt.
It was funny when it started, but then when they actually looked at the logistics of doing a TV show entirely based around a hologram, it's like, oh, yeah, too much of a pain. So we'll use it when we need to use it, and then we'll just ignore it when we don't.
Exactly, and that's kind of how it plays out now. In fact, when we get to the 4th episode, I think there's even a mistake where you hear in the audio on the set he hits something, and it's like doink, like, you hear it. Which, I mean, without a surround sound system in the 80s and early 90s, I don't know if I would have caught that. But the having to get a cold shower, then it is weird, or it's weird that it never happens again. We just don't get an explanation of what is his life like. We know that he can hit himself. They established this. Because after the shower, he gets Peterson's arm.
Yes.
And if I think you remember in one of the previous episodes I mentioned in the novel, they let you know how holograms work, because the guy swings the table mad and goes through the table and hits himself in between the legs. And he does that to himself here, or the Peterson arm attacks himself, which, by the way, is one of my favorite jokes and lines. I definitely wrote down, I've got the arm of a Danish moron. Because I forgot about how we start setting up how Rimmer just hates anybody from another country.
Yeah.
Like, it's just Belgium especially, like, comes up, it's
weird
so
because that bit's it's so slapstick, that bit as well, and it kind of feels out of place a little bit.
Yeah. He's not great at doing it.
No.
Right? It's so, I get the bit and it's funny. I bet you, like a physical performer like Danny John Jules, who's the cat, I bet he could nail something like that.
Probably.
It's one of those things that you almost would want to, and because it's a sitcom, it's not like this, but you'd want to have like a different camera setups where, like, it's like Ash in The Evil Dead, where you're a little closer, the hand is here.
Yeah.
Or, you know what I mean? And you could do a little more with it, but instead it's like on stage, theatrically, basically asking this guy to pull this off. But this, I think it comes down to that thing I talked about in the previous 2 episodes, which is it's still finding its pace.
Yeah.
And like part of that slapstick bit is that it just goes on too long.
Yeah.
I'm like, it should just be, he hits himself and then he hit it like in the balls, then he hits himself in the back of the head, and you're like, you didn't need the head hit, right? The balls thing's already funny. Yeah. Just flop over and be like, I hate everything. But little moments like that where you're like, it's like if I'm directing a stage thing and I see someone do something like, oh, this is funny, tighten it up, take this moment out and get to that part just a little quicker, and this will kill, and it doesn't, that stuff is still kind of in this stage of the show. Yeah.
I think the writers are probably still just trying to, early doors, trying to throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks and figure out what's funny, what fits right with the show and what doesn't, because I don't think there's a lot of slapstick beyond this, not that I can think of, not like to this extent. No,
not very Three Stooges kind of vibe. It doesn't really happen.
Yeah, it was odd.
It feels weird, and it does. I also like, I think the performers too, like right now, we talked about in the very first episode, they're trying to be funny at times.
Yes.
And like later they have the confidence where they're like, this is funny.
Yeah.
This is
we
funny.
just need to do the line as we would do the line, and it's funny rather than trying to make it a joke.
Exactly. And what explains why Lister is so strong in this episode, because it's a little more dramatic for him. He plays things a lot straighter, for lack of a better term, almost the straight man a bit. And so his stuff I feel like some of his jokes and stuff land a little bit better.
It did feel less like the first episode, this one, that like you said, that they feel like every joke needs to be said like a punchline. I didn't feel that as much in this episode, even though, going back off what we talk about, that this is supposed to be, this would have been episode 2, I think the difference between 1 and this one is still quite significant in they understand it a little bit more than they did in that first episode.
Yeah, to that, my other favorite line, because it was his delivery, was Holly saying, you said 14 million words to Rimmer, and Holly, 7 million of those were telling him to smeg off. And he just says it as someone that's annoyed, and it's so funny, and it's so Lister. It's so, that conversation he has with Holly will be so similar to one in season 5.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? and you're like, there it is. There, and like you said, you can just start to feel like that starts to come together for lack of a better term, it's a much better, stronger product,
There was a joke in this one that I really thought of you going off there. The whole, what's that noise? Is that whatever it is? No, it's a chicken. Was the, I can't remember. I think it's when he baked his first cake. And he's like, oh, that's really good, listener. He's like, yeah, it should have been. It was supposed to be roast beef.
Yeah. Yeah. But he says it just so deadpan. Yeah. Is that a cigarette you're smoking? No, it's a chicken.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's that. You're like, oh, give him all of those. Beef.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, I forgot about that. That's the other thing too. When I was watching this with my wife this morning, again for the third time, I'm watching it, and I'm like, man, a lot happens in these episodes. In the US, we're used to because of commercials, a 22-minute episode. And these are 29 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's wild to me how much the extra almost 10 minutes kind of gives to it, because more goes on than it's almost funny looking back and going, it's only 6 episodes for this season, but I have memories like it's a 12-episode season. But I think it's because they're just these chunks, and it allows you in that extra time, instead of having to force every little moment around the one premise, you can do a little stuff. Like the reason I couldn't remember the fish that's in the next episode with the cat is it's just this little chunk of a moment of life for them on the ship, if that makes sense. And so it feels bigger than it is. Yeah,
it's strange. I was actually looking to see, is 29 minutes a normal length for a sitcom episode? And it's you look at stuff like The Office, the American. I was comparing it. I was like, is it a British versus American thing? And I think it's a time slot thing. I think that's what I've worked out because Red Dwarf was on the BBC. BBC didn't have commercial breaks, so they had longer time to play with. Yet you watch American TV and, oh my God, how you managed to fit 4 commercial breaks into a 21-minute episode of a TV show. I remember coming over to the US for the first time and I need to watch some American TV. So you put the TV on the hotel room and watching Friends. There's that opening scene. That's the joke that's not attached to anything else. Then an ad break before the main opening credits. And then there'd be the same at the end. There'd be another couple of commercial breaks. And then you'd have the end of the show, commercial break. And then the end scene as well. And I think that's the difference. Why you're saying that the average episode of a sitcom is 20 minutes, 21 minutes. Because it was on the BBC, they didn't have to shorten their runtime because there was no commercial breaks for it. And it's the same.
And that's why it's perfect for BBC stuff was perfect for PBS in the States, because in the public broadcast service, you only have they don't even call them ads. I mean, they technically are, but they're sponsorship showing who sponsored us,
Right.
And they'll just be a couple between things. So they have a 30-minute slot to drop the show. That's normal for them.
And that's the difference. It's Ghosts. Have you happened to watch Ghosts at all?
I've not. I've been recommended that, though.
I would honestly say watch both versions as well, because the US one's really good and the UK one's really good. But here's an interesting fact. The US series, every episode's 20 to 21 minutes. The UK version, 29 minutes long.
And of course, we're in streaming age, so when I was forced to, I don't know, stayed at a hotel a couple months ago. I'm like, I'll just cut on the TV while I'm winding down for night. I'm like, oh my God, I can't. This is making me nuts. I forgot. I don't watch commercials anymore. And I can only imagine you coming over for the first time and be like, yeah, let's watch some American TV. Oh my God. Brutal.
I mean, it's getting just as bad on YouTube as, to be fair, now as commercials every 30 seconds. I hate it. Anyway, that's not what we're here to talk about, commercial breaks. But yeah,
I'm with you. They're not going to get my money for the premiere version. No. But I get tired of those commercials. Yeah,
without a doubt. But yeah, 29 minutes is a long episode for a sitcom. They're not normally that long, but then looking at the BBC stuff tends to be that long, but like as I say, because they don't have that. And it gives them a little bit more time to play with, which is interesting considering we've talked about trivia already of things being cut due to run time. And I'm not giving you a segue at this point, Blake, but it does kind of lead into that little bit of trivia.
So finally, as Lister's trying to, do his like baking test or whatever for the chef test, Rimmer doesn't want him to accomplish it because then he would outrank him. So he has Holly make him look like Kachansky and comes in. And as you said, her delivery is amazing. Because she does such a good job of being Chris Berry's Rimmer as Kachansky. It's so good. Like, she nails it. But that scene of Rimmer in Kachansky's body was originally much longer, showing off Claire Grogan's acting ability as she impersonated Chris Berry, but the scene had to be cut due to runtime, and the full-length version is included on DVD releases. Now, is that what I'm watching on iTunes? The full-length one?
I don't think so.
I'll have to look it up on YouTube and see if I can see the full scene. I'm sure I can.
Because that's interesting that they've got that extra, that we've just talked about them being 29 minutes and having that extra time, that then they still had stuff that they felt the need to cut to keep the runtime short. In this day and age, would you think you would have just got, they would have, like, for the sake of a couple of minutes, like a 31, 32-minute episode?
Right. Oh, yeah, for streaming today? Yeah, like, okay. Like Mandalorian's 48 minutes and the next one's like 32 minutes or whatever, right? Like, they don't care. Yeah.
That would have been interesting to see what the show would have been given not having those time restrictions.
I like your other trivia thing, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
Because I always try to see if I can notice something that, like, either I don't still understand or at the time when I saw it, I didn't understand. And
so yeah,
it's
this
our
one,
Scudder trivia.
It's the first episode we see the Scudders give Rimmer a 2-fingered salute. And I've had this conversation with my American friends because they don't know what it means. And they do, obviously, they twist their heads because they've got like the 3 pinches, so it twists their head and it's such a British thing. It's the equivalent, obviously, of flipping the bird.
I love to think that the puppeteers were goofing around with that, since it's the 3 fingers making the sort of the clampers, and they saw that, like, we have to do that.
Oh yeah.
Like,
according to this trivia, originating around the 100 Years' War is largely lost on North American viewers, which it is. But apparently, the lore behind it is that it was, I don't know whether it was that, it was during some war where I think it was to do with the French, where the French would capture the British archers and cut off those 2 fingers so they couldn't pull the string back on the bow. So to show defiance against the French, they would stick to show, we've got our 2 fingers. And that's where it comes from. I don't know whether that's true, but that's what I heard.
Oh, wait, speaking of which, doesn't this episode give us another French reference about, what does Holly say to Lister about why he's trying to keep him sane with Rimmer? Oh my God, I actually found a site where I could pull up all the scripts.
Oh yeah, I found them too.
And it said, after Lister says, after Holly says he's the person you do best, over 14 million words in all, Lister, Holly, 7 million of those were me telling him to smeg off. And the other 7 million were him putting me on report for telling him to do so. And then Holly says, Jean-Paul Sartre said hell was being locked forever in a room with your friends, to which Lister replies, Holly, all his mates were French. And then he leaves the which, like, would definitely fall into one of those things as a kid in the U.S. being like, well, do they not, do the English and the French not get along? No. And 10 years old watching that.
Yeah. I mean, definitely 80s, that would have been a lot of the humor. Like, you went back to, I think you brought it up in one of the previous episodes about Allo Allo, so that very much played off that stereotype as well.
It alludes to one of my other favorite lines that will come later, and I think it's Rimmer that says it in one of the later episodes of Broadcast in All Languages, including Welsh.
Oh no, there's a line in this that I love as well. I can't remember where it is now, but it's like the best way I've heard of saying another. So the hell freeze nov, that won't happen because, the day that hell freeze is over. And Rimmer says to Lisa, it must be about passing the exam. I can't remember exactly. And he says, well, that day, my friend, was when you'll see Satan skating to work.
Yes. I love stuff like that.
Yeah, me too. Like a different way of saying something that everybody knows. I was like, that's brilliant.
Speaking of a different way to say something, I saw something in this episode. I went, oh, right. I forgot this is a thing. And as a kid, I thought it was a fake sci-fi thing. And that was that when they come into one of the rooms, on the wall, it's written level Novello.
Oh, you beat me. I've literally got this in my notes.
Oh, do you? Okay, yeah. Maybe you've got more knowledge based on it, but that this is like that it was a bilingual ship, that it was English and Esperanto.
Yes, which plays into later episodes.
Yeah. And those later episodes, when I heard it, that's what I thought it was a fake, like, just, it's like speaking Klingon. I thought it was a fake thing, only to find out, well, in a way, it is kind of a fake thing, but it's a fake thing from the 1800s.
Yeah, so we are completely on the same wavelength, because I've watched it and I've seen that on the underneath the level, like in the first 2 episodes, and I noticed in this one, I was going to look that up and see what it means. And yeah, I thought it was cool that it was Esperanto, and then in later episodes, you find that Rimmer's wanting to learn Esperanto.
And it's a language developed in the 1880s by Polish ophthalmologist L.L. Zamenhof.
As like a worldwide language, wasn't it?
Yeah, so it would be like an international language. Everyone could learn the secondary language so we can all talk together. And like I looked it up, there's some actual Chinese have used it within government stuff. It has been used in things. And it was kind of like, now granted, this is all the Wikipedia search, so as long as Wikipedia editors are on top of their game. But if you look up Esperanto, you'll see like it was this invented language that used some elements of, how certain languages might work, and then had its completely own invented aspects to it. But yeah, I saw, I was like, level Novello. And I was like, oh, right.
That's weird.
I looked and said, what does Novello mean? And then look, it said Esperanto. I was like, oh,
that's cool.
God, I totally forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really cool that we both noticed the same thing and looked it up. I do want to go back to the Rimmer in Kachansky's body bit, because I think it's quite honestly the best scene in the entire episode. And as I said, Claire Grogan absolutely kills it. She is Rimmer incarnate. I love when he's like, so you don't remember when we were behind the bins on the snooker table? And she's like, what? You never told me that. It's like, I thought you would have noticed.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
Like, get out of here, Rimmer. Yeah, I love that.
And
I'm having a woman's period. You're having a woman's period? Bugger off, Rimmer.
When she's like, when he catches on, because she says, I'm looking for a man who's going places,
up the ziggurat, lickety split, yeah.
Yeah.
When he noticed was when he goes, so you might as well pack up your pots and pans. And that's when he twigged, because that's not how she speaks at all.
You can also kind of get the idea that, like, this is why he will never ask this again, because he never wants to see Rimmer in Kachansky's body ever again.
So good. It is the best scene without a doubt.
Well, I've seen something you haven't.
Yeah. And you would, though, wouldn't you?
That would be one of my other favorite lines, is after he gets turned back in Rimmer, almost 90% complete, and he says, Holly, this is not my right breast.
No rush, Holly.
Yeah. So good.
So good. It's like, so that brings a couple of little bits I put down. I mean, the joke, it's so funny, but you see it coming a mile off, and he's like, whose ears are these, Holly? They're like 2 satellite dishes sticking out, and you know what's coming. They're yours, Arnold. And he's like, and then his hips, these hips definitely aren't mine. But what I love is that he walks off with his hips swaying, and then Lister comes out to get his results. And when Rimmer walks back over, he's still swinging his hips like they're not his. And he could have quite easily just not bothered and just walked over normally, but I love that he leans into it when he walks back.
Just keeps it going just a little bit longer.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, I think it's one of those things, if you're the people working on the show, on the creative part, the more you see these guys do stuff like that, the more you're like, oh, okay, I know what we got to do for the next thing. You can almost see the second season being worked on live. Like they're going, oh, we got to do stuff like this, based off what they see. Because
that's like when we talked about the slapstick, there's a difference between slapstick and physical comedy.
Yes.
And that's where the physical comedy is, with the hips and stuff like that, as opposed to the slapstick, which is an easy laugh. That stuff works better for me.
Which we'll see more of that. Like we'll see a ton more of that kind of stuff as it goes.
I bet you're thinking of the same episode I am.
Yes. So I have one last thing I wrote down. And is there a joke that I'm not getting?
Okay.
Or is it a commentary on American sport I'm not getting? But I realized watching this episode while Lister has the 0G football posters in his bunk bed, that as a 10-year-old kid in rural North Carolina, I did not know the world called soccer football.
Okay.
Right? I had 3 channels, as I said in the previous episode. I had no clue, right? No clue the world called it football. So he's saying 0G football, but in the background, the players are all wearing American football helmets and uniforms.
I've not.
Have you noticed that?
I have not.
Oh, see, I thought for sure you'd have something on this because I wanted to know, is there a joke there? Like, was this a commentary of like, we're going to do insane zero G football, but it looks like American football? There's some kind of joke there.
I don't think it is. The way I would look at it is, if imagine you were playing 0G football with no padding or equipment or a helmet or anything on, it's pretty dangerous.
It would be, but the fact they put them in American football gear.
Yeah, I don't.
And then if you look at Lister's London Jets shirt, it is shaped like a American football or a rugby ball more than it's not a soccer ball.
Interesting.
It's not a football. Sorry to everybody who listens from the UK.
Look, let's be honest. I've had this conversation with your other co-hosts, and it turns out that the term soccer is actually a British term anyway.
That World War I vets picked it up from their British buddies that they met and brought it back to the States.
Which is weird. Yeah.
Isn't that weird?
Very strange.
I was trying to find an actual picture from the show to share with you.
Yeah.
But like it's I've
never noticed that.
But yeah, it's definitely there. I don't know if I can share it in our chat if that works on this thing or not, but they're in American football gear. I just thought, well, is there some, is this making a commentary about like the only reason this is so dumb playing a sport with all this crazy armor? The only reason you should be doing that if this is like 0G or something, or were they just like, in the future, people will be into Esperanto, just like they're like, you know what, in the future, American football takes over and gets even more extreme, and it's 0G football.
Yeah, it does look that way from that poster. That's definitely if you looked at it, it doesn't look like football. It looks like American football, as we would call it.
And in the poster that's in this episode, in the 4th episode, behind Lister's head in the bunk, it's like the team, and it's like 8 dudes in the football helmets, like in the American football helmet. So I didn't know, and I couldn't find anything about that other than this is the fake sport that's in the Red Dwarf. That I couldn't find anything in particular about it. So
yeah, strange. There's nothing in the book about it.
Just as 0G football.
Strange, because as a British thing, someone mentions football, especially in the 80s, you would go to soccer.
Right. But then but in the background, all the uniforms are American football. So
very strange.
I mean, I know they took some fun swings at like, this is what the future will be, like having fun with it. Yeah. So, and of course, now that the NFL plays matches over in the UK, I mean, look, they weren't that far off. Like,
no.
It could happen.
Strange. I've never paid that close attention to it, but you're right, entirely.
Yeah. At some point, Elon Musk will send up, instead of the International Space Station, the International Sports Station, and then we'll begin 0G football.
Cool. I think all that leaves at this point is to rate the episode out of 10, Blake, I guess, unless you've got anything else you wanted to bring up.
No, this is tough. I think I gave a harsher score, and now that we've talked through it, I want to change my score. I had it still. I said its chemistry is still feeling like it's in its infancy. That like some of the chemistry between them and really feeling like the crew and how kind of talk about the cat not quite being in things yet. But now that we talked this episode, I think I can't go lower than an 8. It's a solid 8, I think, for me. And I had gone a little less because, and I usually tend to write my score on my first watch. I try to give it the like my gut reaction, and I just like, man, still the pacing, the chemistry is still just not quite there yet. But having talked about it, I think I can go Lord 8 off Christine Kachansky's performance alone as Rimmer. She's a 10 out of 10 for that.
I think I'm going to go, I enjoyed it. I don't think it's a top episode, so I'm going to give it a 7, I think.
Well, that's where I was at, but I don't know. The Kachansky conversation pushed me over.
I'd love to see more of that. I'd love to see more of, and I don't think we do, Rimmer as other members of the crew would be hilarious. I love how I'm talking about this like like we're watching it for the first time and it's still ongoing, that there aren't 8, 9, 10, 11 seasons ahead of us that we could literally watch now.
Exactly. It feels like we're doing it live as we're going.
It does.
As I'm like, oh, I said, you want to watch the next one? I'm like, no, I gotta wait till we record the next episode. Then I can watch the next one.
I mean, obviously, honestly, like I know you've talked about it a little bit, but once we get past the end of season 2, my memory of 3 onwards is very, very blurry. Like these are still, I must have watched the first 2 seasons a lot because these are still fairly fresh in my mind when I watch them. Beyond these first 2, yeah, it's going to be a very interesting view because I can't remember very much about them at all.
I think for me, 4 through 6, I watched the most.
Okay.
Not even season 3. It's season 4 through 6, the ones I saw the most. So I'll be curious to get back to those. It's because it's still been a very long time, but I watched them the most.
Cool.
These first 2 seasons were the least.
Right.
Shall we wrap us up then?
I think so. Thanks everyone for joining us, but that is the end of the podcast.
Yeah, follow us on the Facebooks and Instagrams at Dwarf Memory and on Twitter at Dwarf_Memory for all the show updates.
Of course, you can email us your comments and thoughts, but please don't tell us because we don't want to hear that. Our egos are far too brittle, are too fragile for that at the moment. And that email address is dwarfmemory@gmail.com. And join us for the next episode, which we will be discussing season 1, episode 4, and that is Waiting for God. So make sure you watch it before you listen to the next one.
Yeah. Oh, you can tell us to smeg off. That'll make me happy.
Yeah, that will be funny.
That.
Yeah.
I think that went pretty well, Mr. Malby. How do you think the episode went, Mr. Malaby?
How do I think this episode went, Mr. Malaby, sir?